In the previous lesson, we started covering some more advanced presentation elements like images, lists, including ordered lists, unordered lists, and also tables. Now I want to take a deeper dive into each of these elements and go into some of the nuances that you'll have to watch out for when implementing them in your own project. And let's start with images. When you work with images, you'll probably use something like Google image search to find images that you want to use in your HTML file. So let's go to images.google.com and let's search for cat photos. Note that underneath each cat picture, we're given a resolution, which is the width of the image times the height of the image in pixels. This is because most images that you'll work with are going to be JPEGs or PNG images. PNG images are transparent and allow the background to show through, whereas JPEG images have a colored background. In case you have certain elements that are in the background that you'd like to show, it's better to use PNG images instead of JPEG images. And you can specify that in Google image search by going to Tools, and then under Color, select Transparent. And that'll give you some pictures with a transparent background. Using these images will make sure that your background color or your background elements continue to show and the image doesn't take up the full height and width of its resolution. And this transparent background is indicated in Google image search with these squares. So this is actually not what the background will look like. The background here is transparent, and that's only possible with PNG images. So if it's a JPEG image with a .jpg extension, it will definitely have a background that will show up. But if it's a PNG image, it's possible that it can have a transparent background. Another thing to watch out for when working with images, especially when you're importing images from different URLs, is to take a look at the extension. Sometimes the extension of the image does not show up in the URL. So in order to make sure that your image will show up inside of your HTML document, it's generally a good idea to only use URLs with a .jpeg or .png at the end, or inspect the image's source and get the URL that way. Right here in the image's source, the URL here matches up with the URL up here in our browser. So that means we can expect that if we used this image in our HTML document, we would also see the image just as it shows up here. So that's a little bit about working with images online. What about working with images locally on your computer? Many times, you'll actually see a separate folder for images in a project. So instead of all of the images being in the same folder as the HTML file, you'll sometimes see them in a separate images folder. So let's create a new folder called images and import our course image into the images folder. Now when we save and refresh, the image doesn't show up anymore. However, when we change the image source to images/course image, it shows up again. Other times, you might see all of the HTML files in one folder, and then that same folder also has another folder next to it with all of the images. For example, sometimes you might see a folder with all the HTML files, and then let's create a separate folder on the desktop with images. So again, let's take our course image and then drag it into the images folder and delete this old images folder that we're not going to be using anymore. So now we have two folders on our desktop instead of one. One has all of our HTML files, and then the other has all of our images. This is where things get a little bit tricky, because all image paths locally have to be relative to your current HTML file. So just to show you that this breaks, when I save and refresh, the course image doesn't show up anymore. To access the course image, we need to go up one folder and out of our current folder with all the HTML files, and then go into the images folder that's on our desktop. So to do that, we specify a special notation called the double dot. The double dot lets us go back one folder, and now we can enter the images folder like brackets suggests. And notice that this folder is case sensitive. So now when we enter the images folder with a capital I, we should be able to access our course image. It still doesn't show up. It does show up though inside of brackets. Brackets is able to detect it. So what's going on here? This is an edge case where my computer is actually detecting this HTML file as not being secure. So because I haven't given this HTML file explicit permission to access the folder that's stored on my desktop, it's not able to access the folder. This is one of the reasons why it's actually not good practice to have your images in a parent folder to your HTML file. It's generally a better idea to keep all of your images within the same folder as your HTML file. So the structure that we had before, where we went to images/courseimage.jpg, is actually better for security reasons compared to this structure that I just showed you. So let's go ahead and drag our images folder inside our web folder and then change this URL to a capital I, and then now our image shows up again. The main purpose of that exercise was really to just show you the double dot notation in case you need to go back one folder when referencing an image in your HTML file. Now, before we wrap up, I do want to tell you about one other image type that is really interesting. So far we've covered JPEGs and PNGs. We've been largely using JPEGs so far that do have a background, but PNGs can have a transparent background. And there's one other image type that I want to show you that started being widely supported in HTML5, and that is the scalable vector graphics format. So here's a little bit of an explanation on SVG. When using icons, try to use your icons in SVG format, because SVG is a format that will look great across all devices. So I'm just going to do a quick search of free SVG file, and I actually ended up coming across an SVG image about the SVG logo. So here, notice the extension .svg. And maybe you can't really see it on my screen, but this image looks especially clear and very crisp. The problem that some JPEG and PNG images run into is that if they don't have a high enough resolution, they look a little bit blurry. But here, when we link to an SVG image, I'm going to create a paragraph. Below is an SVG image. And now when I link an SVG image, no matter how much I zoom in my web browser, it'll continue to stay very crisp and very clear with no pixelation. This is the ideal image format for things like icons because it looks great on all mobile devices and also high resolution screen sizes. So those are some of the more advanced features of images. And next, we'll cover some advanced features of lists.